how did the whole Satguru thing begin for you?
You treat your God like a habitually disobedient member of your household. Bhakti is a spirited response.
Wait, do you feel that poets are born and not made?
I have a whole cycle of poems about a woman called Abbayar who voluntarily chooses old age. Language, when it danced, was poetry. And dynamic listening I see as the basis of all creativity. A 12th century Kannada prostitute poet, because she defines her God as the shameless one. I had to think of my reader as me.
So when, negativity comes, do you just outright dismiss it? Or do you have to go through your own processing?
When beauty is no longer just about sort of packaging yourself, it's about the great joy of unpackaging. If that's all it takes to be forgotten, maybe it's okay to be forgotten. So you tune into the deeper parts of yourself. Without self-esteem, there will be no confidence.
So in writing, how do you break this up?
Art involves craft. So, when people say hard work, I don't know if it's hard. I just know that it's immersive work.
Yes.
You're lost. Any art form practiced rigorously is transformative.
Yes.
That I needed to suffer in order to create.
When you grab the idea, it means you're willing to come back with it, work with it.
It's not just about neatly patterning sound and silence. It's about understanding that this is the octane that fuels a poem. Otherwise, there would be no poem at all.
How have you learned to quieten the outside voices?
But on some deep level, I have a hunch that we are the authors of our lives. The Bhakti poets invite us to experience. They do not invite us to academic knowledge. She says, I eat God. I drink God. I sleep on God.
Today, we have the privilege of speaking with celebrated poet, author, and spiritual seeker, Arundhati Subramaniam. She takes us through her journey, her explorations, be it about her various writings on Bhakti poetry, on her biography on Satguru. But I think the most interesting is how she found her own strength, her own voice. Besides, of course, a lot of tips to aspiring authors and to women, or I should say people, on how to find their strength, their confidence, on living and navigating through life fearlessly. So let's welcome Arundhati Subramaniam on the Creativity Dialogues with Chandana Dixit. I would like to start with a strange question because it kind of stuck me as you walked in and when I got to know you. You carry yourself with an uncommon confidence. And I was really wondering that has this always been the way that you carry yourself? Has it been something that you acquired over time?
It's an interesting question.
Are you even aware of it?
I'm aware that there were times I've had to project confidence. That didn't always mean that I felt confident. But I think, Chandana, it's probably been a combination of the many disciplines that I was lucky enough to be exposed to, primarily yoga, which is about in some way trying to align the person you are with what you do. So once that alignment started growing, I think I felt maybe not necessarily confident, but I felt at least a certain clarity about what I was setting out to do and who I was. I think probably this is true for all of us. Then when we stop trying to pretend to be someone else and we just grow more comfortable in ourselves,
So would you
that
say,
alignment happens.
yeah, so was it not that from childhood you carried a confidence about yourself? Was there a particular point for you when the yoga and when things started to connect that you felt,
Definitely, I know that for years I have been plagued by self-doubt. That's how I think of my adolescence.
yeah,
There are probably many people who looked at me who thought I was confident.
yeah,
So that's just about projecting
yeah,
a certain measure of, a certain poise comes to
yeah,
you.
yeah,
In my case, it probably came from my years of learning classical dance, for instance.
yeah,
A way of
yeah.
carrying yourself.
Yes.
But that certainly didn't mean I felt any real confidence.
Yeah.
I think it is about losing myself in my craft, actually working on my art, immersing myself in it. That was one part of the work. The other part of the work was probably just growing more comfortable in my own skin,
Yeah,
relaxing
yeah,
into myself
yeah,
a little more.
yeah.
So I think that made it a kind of, I'm very interested in the idea of the spine. I think reclaiming your spine, but not growing rigid. To
Yes,
me,
yes.
perhaps the
Yeah,
problem
yeah,
earlier with me was that there was a rigidity in the uprightness. I hope it's a little more relaxed now.
yeah. And do you feel that just having this boldness and this confidence, does it overall help in our progress? In just because I think many people, especially many women, just struggle. So even whatever they're capable of, they tend to underplay that for
Yeah,
some strange reason.
yeah.
And it kind of it's I don't know whether it's considered a feminine trait of underplaying,
Hmm.
smiling, never
Oh,
really
yeah.
stepping up to your first thing.
Yeah.
And so that the very fact that you carry yourself unabashedly confident and just opinionated, having your own personality, I feel what's that how do you do that, because I think so many women struggle with this.
I know. I would say, I mean, I've been one of them. I've certainly known what it's like to struggle with that. And I think the problem is that somewhere, yes, there's exactly what you talked about, that we feel we need to perhaps downplay our strengths in order to fit in or to be acceptable. Smile is one of those things that women are socialized into doing so early, isn't it?
Or
To
just
be
being
acceptable,
agreeable.
being agreeable, being
Don't create conflicts, don't
absolutely.
disagree. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I think that's certainly part of the conditioning. But I would also say that simply projecting confidence without feeling it is never going to be the answer either, because it comes through as a kind of hollow confidence. So when I speak of reclaiming the spine, what I'm talking of is really how do you grow as much as possible into your authentic self? How do you then grow comfortable with being who you are? And then can you speak from that place of ease and clarity, knowing that no one else can be you, just as you cannot be someone else? So I think for me, it's really been about unlearning a lot and then learning really the science of alignment, which is what yoga is about and which has been invaluable to me. But equally, also, it's something I've learned from my own art, immersing myself in the world of words, which is what I live in, really, but trying to understand the rhythms of word and silence, not being in a hurry to create an effect, but relaxing into that world, which is as much about silence as it is about sound, and finding my own way within that.
Hey, that's so interesting, Arundhati. Could you just read out a piece, because your poem actually exhibits this point beautifully. So I
You
think
know,
if you could.
and what I will do is to read a little prose extract
Okay,
because
awesome.
I think there is a particular paragraph in this new book that I have called Women Who Wear Only Themselves,
Oh, I
which
love
I
that
think is,
title.
in
Women
fact,
who wear only
I think
themselves.
that will actually
That's a
address
provocative title. How did you think of such a provocative title?
the idea of wearing yourself excites me. But of course, it's also a riff on the Clarissa Pinkola Estes book,
Women
Women Who
who run
Run
with
with
the
the
wolves.
Wolves. Exactly. So it struck me when I was in college and I first read this Christian feminist theologian who said something that had a very deep impact on me. She said, if what we consider to be the male stumbling block or sin, she called it sin, but what she meant was really an obstacle
Hmm.
on the spiritual journey of self understanding. For a man, it is often assumed to be the ego.
Yeah.
But she says for a woman, it may not be the ego at all. She says what it could well be is a dependence on others for one's self definition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
And
need the validation
that's
or
right.
approval.
And you're
Yeah.
encouraged to live that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
encouraged to fritter away a lot
Yeah.
of your self,
Yeah.
your energies
Yeah.
in order to please, in order to be sensitive to the world around you. And that struck a very deep chord. So as I write here, I said I knew the innumerable ways in which women were routinely encouraged to fritter away personal power.
Mm.
I was familiar with the subtle and not so subtle ways in which they continued to be trivialized, damned with faint praise for speaking the soft language of the heart. Soft into inverted commas. There are so many contexts in which they are called upon to play appeasers and people pleasers when they're compelled to broker a cheap peace rather than a more profound harmony.
So beautiful.
So to me,
So
this
beautiful.
was really something I was probably aware of in some way as early as as my teens. But then how does one start reclaiming the self? And I think we all go through periods when we try to mimic others.
Yes.
So you try to mimic those who project confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without quite feeling it yourself.
Yes.
So in my case, I was also a writer. So I unconsciously.
But if I may interrupt,
Yeah.
you picked the right thing to imitate, which is confidence.
Yes.
A lot of people think it's all, if you imitate, it's about imitating some external things. What do they wear? Or how are they doing things? But they won't pick that this person has amazing confidence. They are bold.
Yes.
So I think many people miss on this fact that it's more imitation, as in pure imitation. It's not really, trying to understand what makes that person unique or what brings their confidence, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to project it. So,
I'd say even deeper than
Uh-huh.
confidence, Chandana, I'd say is how do you recover your sense of self-esteem?
yeah,
Without self-esteem,
Yeah.
there will be no confidence. It will
absolutely.
be a hollow confidence.
Correct.
So I think that became the journey of my life in many ways, How do you recover that sense of self? How do you, do you possess it at all?
Yeah.
So the first stage of learning, I think, for most of us is imitation.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
imitate those you
Correct.
admire.
Correct.
As a writer, I would imitate the writers I admired and often ended up sounding like those I disliked. Those are all the problems of imitation.
Yeah.
And at some point, you become very uncomfortable with yourself. But I feel there are these stages. I would actually define these as 3 stages. There is the stage of what I call unconscious imitation,
Yes.
where you're not even
Yeah,
aware
you
that
don't
you're
even know
imitating.
why you're imitating.
But you are.
But you are.
So you imitate those people unconsciously.
When we say imitate,
Yeah.
would you imitate their writings,
Mhm.
their writing styles, or would you even emulate their personalities completely?
A bit of both. A bit of both. You're trying to be someone else, essentially.
Yes.
This is the time when you're being told, do you have a role model? Who is your role model?
Yeah.
And you're trying to imitate them,
Yes.
without sometimes even being aware of it.
Yeah.
Perhaps that stage is almost inevitable,
Yes.
So
Yeah. I completely think that's because every person has spoken of this, that
Yes.
it's a part of finding yourself.
Mhm.
You can't do it without having something to just compare, to build a framework against.
Yes.
Even if you evolve completely in a different direction eventually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, especially if you're a poet, I was a practitioner of poetry, you allow other voices to speak through you. I used to call it a process of seance. When, you are so busy imitating others that other voices speak through you, they don't sound like you, but this is how deeply and unconsciously you're imitating.
Yeah.
After that came what I would call the more self-conscious stage. So there's the unconscious stage, then the more self-conscious stage, when I became very aware, hyper-aware of all the resources of language that I was using, image, tone, sound, rhythm, all the resources in a poet's arsenal.
Did these come from your dance background? Were they enhanced?
No, I think the dance
was this
background is
before?
different. I'm talking about the poetry. So really, I'm thinking of all that was available to me as a poet. So I think that became the self-conscious stage of trying to grow into oneself. It becomes a sort of, there's a strain in it.
Yes.
You're trying to be yourself.
And it's so...
Earlier it's unconscious, now it becomes
and now,
self-conscious.
because you're like over-projecting.
Yeah. So it is, I think, the third stage, which is a more comfortable stage, which is, I like to think of as the more conscious stage of selfhood or of being a creator of any kind, where you're not operating unconsciously, but nor are you operating with this kind of self-conscious tension
Do you
that
think
earlier
that comes...
characterized who you were.
Right. Do you think that came because you had expectations from the outcome, and once you surrendered, that it really didn't matter what really was coming out of it. That
Yes.
you were willing to just let it be.
Yeah, I think even more than
Yeah.
surrender, I would use the word trust. When you
Yes.
know
Yeah. Yeah.
you begin to know the resources that you're working with, if whatever your
And even
craft
your capacity.
and your capacity, and you begin to align your craft and your creativity, as in you begin to align your artistry with authenticity. You're taking a deep breath and allowing yourself
Yeah.
to settle
Yeah.
into yourself, really. And I think at that point, you just become more you,
Yeah.
but you also become more aware of what's going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
with your
Yeah.
work and with the world around you. I feel that's more of a
Yeah.
stage
Yeah.
of what I think of as relaxed.
I was about to
It's a
say
more
that.
relaxed
Yeah.
way of being.
Just relaxed and being at ease.
Yes.
How difficult and traumatic is it? Because I think that almost every person,
Yeah.
until they find that phase, or should I say, come to that point,
Yeah.
um, it's so traumatizing because I think one really wonders: is there really a light at the end of this tunnel as you keep, mulling and just in those phases?
It is hard.
It is.
The
It is.
journey of becoming yourself is
It's
hard.
hard.
It involves so much unlearning,
Yeah.
and then it involves, learning how to be yourself,
Yeah.
which I don't
Yeah.
think comes too easily to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
You know, paradoxically, it doesn't. It doesn't. So it's been hard. Certainly, it's been hard, but it's also been enjoyable. It's also been
Yeah. Yeah.
pleasurable.
Yeah.
You know?
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, what could be greater than the idea that you find yourself?
Hmm.
There couldn't be just anything better than
Yes.
that.
I think it's an ongoing journey. I don't think I found myself in some definitive way, but I certainly feel more at ease with who I am.
So, Arundhati, another sort of unusual distinction is that you write bhakti poetry, and it'll be lovely if you could describe that, as well as you write that in English, which is uncommon to say the least. So, if you could sort of explain how that happened, and also how did you feel comfortable? Did you feel you would have a really wide audience for this, or what were you really thinking when you decided to commit to poetry, that to bhakti poetry?
Yeah, so I certainly don't see myself as a writer of bhakti poetry. I see myself as a poet primarily, or a practitioner of poetry. On good days, poems happen. On not so good days, I'm not a poet at all. So I think of myself as a practitioner. And bhakti poetry came into my life later,
Uh-huh.
later in my life. We'll
Mm.
come to that in a
Yeah,
minute.
yeah,
I think what drew me to poetry was something very simple. It was just a great excitement at being around language that danced. You talked of dance earlier.
yes,
I've had an
yes.
early childhood excitement about dance. So it seemed to me that language, when it danced, was poetry. And I loved it. I loved the way it leapt from one place to the other, the way it didn't join the dots, the way it was capable of being here one moment and there the next, and you didn't know how it got there. That's the excitement.
But how did you find the words? Because I think that's something that words just come naturally. Do you feel that poets are born and not made? Or can somebody, I mean, at least in your case, did the words just come naturally? Because I'm so envious of poets. I think that it's uh, it's so magical when you're able to just see the right words in the right way, with the right flow, with the rhythm, with the language. In your case, did that
A lot of
just
that
happen?
can be learnt.
It
But
can
I
be.
will say, I'm very envious of musicians and I'm very envious of painters. Certainly, there is something like a facility with,
Mhm.
with words, or some have it
Yeah,
with
yeah.
images. It's different for different people.
But this
That
brings me,
facility
are you
helps.
gifted? Because, we all, I always wonder about people's innate gifts. And were you aware that I have this natural gift
I
for
was
this?
aware that I was excited when I was around words, but I was much less excited when I was around numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know people who are
Yeah, yeah,
hugely
yeah, yeah.
excited around numbers. I wish
Yes.
I had that
Mm-hmm.
particular
Mm-hmm.
propensity. I
Yeah,
don't have it.
yeah, yeah.
But I knew words excited
Mm-hmm.
me, and words, when they danced, were magic.
Yeah,
So I was excited by the dance. I was
mm,
excited by the musicality of language.
yeah,
That's what drew me.
yeah.
I see myself as a poet or as a practitioner mainly because I was a listener. I started out as a listener, and a very spellbound listener. I was spellbound from the start.
Again, I have to interrupt you here because, people like to do things, but they are impulsive.
Mm-hmm.
They are like so full of whatever they want to do
Yeah.
that to have the ability, while you're really interested in something,
Yeah.
to really have that, to be able to hold yourself back in a sense,
Mm.
to be able to listen to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's not a common thing at all because
Chandana, I actually believe listening is a prerequisite for all
it is,
creative
it is,
activity.
it is completely.
There
But I
can be
think
an
people struggle the most with that because they feel that excitement which you talk about,
Mhm.
and that's the natural impulse.
Yes.
But I think why it takes people so long to get through the journey is because the excitement carries them, it sweeps them. And I feel the only thing which could root them was the ability to listen. So, would you say that inherently you had the ability to listen?
I believe most of us do. I would like to believe all of us do. But I don't think the worlds we live in encourage us to see listening
Yes,
as a virtue.
yes,
We are often encouraged to see listening as mere passivity.
completely.
And it is not. There is something like dynamic listening. And dynamic listening, I see as the basis of all creativity. I
Absolutely.
think what happened with me is that I just continued listening. That's what happened.
And that's so powerful because I think before you're set to do anything, there's something in the universe which is calling out to you to be done through you. And if you don't have the ability to listen, uh, something more meaningful would never emerge because you'd be so swept off with just whatever was exciting you in the moment that that something deeper, more powerful.
In fact, this actually
Yeah.
brings me to the fact that I often say that no one crosses the age of 16 without having written one poem.
Really?
No one. No one. There is something about the way in which our emotional thermostat works, especially in our adolescence, the intensity with
Yeah.
which we
Yeah.
experience life.
Yeah.
You have to have written one love poem, one loss poem, at least,
Yeah.
by the time you're 16. But the great irony is that all of us have written a poem, but not all of us read other poems. So this is to me one of the strangest paradoxes as far as poetry is concerned.
This is so odd. This is so
Yes.
true. This is such a interesting observation. And I think people do this in all streams. I mean, whether they're painting, they don't want to actually study paintings of, they just want to get into it. Bring the colors, bring the thing. I need to just start drawing painting, whether it's singing. I need to just sing. People need to enjoy listening to me, appreciate me. But there's not too many people who really want to invest in listening, understanding. And why do you think that is?
I think there is the natural exuberance, of course, of
Yeah,
wanting to express
yeah.
ourselves. But if we lose the capacity to
Mm,
listen,
mm.
I think we lose something vital because I often define poetry as just the art of inspired eavesdropping on the self.
Yes.
But if you don't know how to
So
eavesdrop,
beautifully put.
you're just going
Yes.
to be talking all the time.
Yeah.
Do we
Yeah.
want to just keep talking or do we also want to be listening through the deeper parts of ourselves?
So when you say a thought, um, as you've been evolving on the journey, have you always just responded to a thought or a situation that happens? Or have you even deliberately decided that, okay, I just heard of this theme, it's interesting. Should I explore what comes to me? What has been your process of gathering material that you would sort of use to express? Or has it just been that things just emerge without your going for them consciously?
I think for me, because my discipline is poetry, often it's not a thought, an idea doesn't occur in some sort of vacuum. It occurs as a line or as a phrase, but with a sound. It has a texture. It has a mood. So it's that phrase or that image, a verbal image,
Uh-huh.
that I then feel inclined to follow. It seems like it's
Yeah.
compelling.
Have you many times felt lost that I don't even know where this is going?
Of course.
I've heard many artists say that you need to feel completely lost in order to find yourself. Would you agree with that?
I would say that I need to obey the summons of that phrase and I need to follow where it wants to lead me. This does not mean that I give up control. It means that I have to be aware of all that it takes. You have to have the reins and you also have to know when to let go. So it's a combination of craft and trust. The two have to go together. If you have too much of one and not enough of the other, you're lost. So it's not just about losing yourself and, oh, I'm lost and therefore I'm an artist. No, you could be lost and just another lost person.
What happens in a situation where you might be confused that there are two or three possible ways in which you could take it? Because
Mhm.
as a painter, I felt this conflict many times. Like I start off, and it could be something as simple as starting off with a warm palette. And as things start to develop, I suddenly start to add in more colors. The chroma, the intensity goes up. And then sometimes I feel really sad that I lost my beginning point. And at times I've struggled that I've gone with the spontaneous flow of taking it in a certain direction, but it lost the initial sort of
So I think your real
voice.
question here is about spontaneity and the role of spontaneity in creation, in the creative process. I'd say spontaneity is hugely important,
Yeah.
but it is not everything. So just because you feel deeply, and suppose you're in a moment of great anger, okay?
Yeah.
And you sit and work with your
Mhm.
canvas, I may sit and splatter myself on a page
Yeah.
in terms of words. That could make for a very effective journal entry, but that does not necessarily make for a poem. So I may splatter myself across 3 and 4 pages of my diary.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's what I felt today. When does it become a poem?
Yeah.
So spontaneity alone doesn't make it a poem, but spontaneity is an important part of it. Yeah. There is also craft. There is also craft.
Yes.
So many people overplay the spontaneity part of things. To them, I'd often say, no, remember that poetry is also about revision. It's also about going back and looking at what you've done.
Keeping your
Of
patience.
course, your
Because I
patience.
think people just feel this is done, this is my best.
Yeah.
And I think that that's limiting.
Yeah. More than patience. I would say it is about if you really want to do your best, you want to know
So
what
if
this.
you're ready to just settle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does this poem really want to do? Where does it want to go? So you go back to it, you revise. I wouldn't often consider a poem ready for years. It takes time.
Wow. Yeah.
It takes
And
time.
has it happened that you've thought something is complete, done?
Mm.
Have you ever revisited a poem? Say after a very long time, it could even be decades or
Mhm.
I mean, just to show the expanse of time. Have you ever found
Well,
yourself
I
doing
look
that?
back on my very first book of poems, which was published in 2001, and I look at it. I like the book, but would I have done things differently today? Of course. But I don't
Yeah.
think there's any point for myself.
Right,
I try
right.
not to berate myself too much about that
Yeah,
because I was a different person.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that in poetry or in books, there's nothing much you can do. I think where I meant it from the point of view of paintings, that sometimes I found myself going back to things I painted when I was in college, and I try to fix it. And I have people around me telling me, don't. It's not perfect, but just leave it.
Hmm.
Don't try to
I
get
think
to
what
that
you need to do
perfect
at that
thing.
point is to paint another painting.
Yes.
That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
So there's a lovely line by a poet, Paul Valéry, who says that you don't really complete a poem, you only abandon it. Once you've abandoned this, you try the new one.
Correct.
So,
So, Arundhati, just to take our conversation forward on the idea that there's spontaneity, what are your thoughts on play and creativity? So, have you used that personally, that just playing and just kind of having fun?
I mean, I see my work is really just having fun. I think of it as having fun. And when I say having fun, I don't see having fun as being irresponsible.
Yeah, no frivolous
It's
kind
not
of,
frivolous because a game, if we were to think of a game,
yeah.
we play it pretty intensely,
Yes,
whatever the game.
yeah,
We play it because we want to do bloody well at it.
absolutely.
So all those
Yeah.
things are very important. But there's fun in the process. There's pleasure in the process. There's a sensual delight in the process. So to me, that's fun. People often separate inspiration and perspiration, as in, I had the spontaneous moment, I created a poem, and then I kept on having to work at it for ages, tearing my hair out and trying to do my penance. I don't see these two as separate. There's a great deal of joy and fun and pleasure in reworking a poem too.
Yes. And you know what really interested me was that you brought in the word sensual,
Yeah.
pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you bring in words like sensual, pleasure,
Mm.
and then on one part, you talk about, spirituality, bhakti, how is there really a meeting point for this? Because women have sort of been divided into sections.
Mm.
Society is not very comfortable with seeing them as the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that you're trying to, show them as they really are. So, some thoughts on this, and how do women actually embrace both these parts? Because I feel as women, we are seekers as well.
I think
And
all of us, I
still,
mean, men
yeah,
and women
yeah,
can be
men, but
seekers.
men at least have the freedom to
Yeah.
be who they are. They're not considered to be one or the other necessarily.
Mm.
Uh,
I think different, everyone deals with different sets of constraints, and I know many men deal with their own. But I'll say this, and if you'll give me a moment to reflect on what we mean by bhakti, which is why I didn't want to come into it
yes,
too easily.
yes,
Bhakti, for those who might not even know what it means, is considered to be devotion. That's the popular translation, and I'm fine with that translation. The only problem is, Chandana, growing up, I thought devotion meant piety, it meant religiosity, it meant servility, you know,
yeah,
being
yeah,
slavish. I thought
yeah.
that's why I'm very wary of using the word surrender because the word is overused
Yeah,
and it often
and
seems
misused as well,
misused
unfortunately.
to
Yeah,
suggest slavishness,
yes,
you know.
yes,
So, bhakti to me was something I was never comfortable with. I grew up reading bhakti poetry like many of us did, but never taking it very seriously until my own spiritual journey took on a certain intensity. And that's when I realized that bhakti is far from being servile. Bhakti is a spirited response to the notion of the sacred. It's really a powerful, passionate, audacious, gutsy, irreverent, sometimes erotic, sometimes argumentative conversation with the divine. That's what it is. And as I started reclaiming the bhakti poets for myself, I realized that what they were doing is actually journeying into those little crevices of the heart that many of us keep sealed
yeah.
and locked up because they're inconvenient, because they'll make us look
And because they're contradictory.
contrary, they're contradictory in many ways. They also don't make us look always very nice or very
Yes,
pretty or very
yes, yes.
decorative.
And I think that the people who appreciate you because of the qualities you've projected,
Yeah.
if they were to see the other side, they may not
Yeah.
be able to handle it.
Of
And
course.
that's probably the reason why people feel very reluctant to explore or certainly to project.
That's right.
Yeah.
But when you read the Bhakti poets, you realize they have no such inhibitions. They're capable of loving their gods, but they're also capable of arguing with their gods. They're also capable of quarreling with their gods. There's Namdev who hurls cuss words at his gods. So many of our Bhakti poets do it, and the idea is you can do anything because it is a relationship of such intimacy.
Yes.
There's nothing transgressive here. You treat your God like a habitually disobedient member of your household. He belongs to your family, in fact. And the Bhakti poets take it to that logical end. He is you, or she is you. There is really no difference. So it's with that assumption of intimacy that they speak. So every cranny in your consciousness, however inconvenient socially it might be, when it is explored and when it is acknowledged, it will infuse your poetry and every utterance with something so authentic and so powerful that, well, it speaks to us across the centuries. To me, that excited me about
Yes.
Bhakti.
Yes.
It is not at all a status quoist response to power.
I think bhakti is also so connected with religion often that there are just certain kind of
Shutters that
yeah,
many of us have.
which many people have. So for bhakti, the way you are suggesting it is so expansive, which encourages a person to be all of themselves.
That's right.
Whereas religion doesn't allow that. It wants you to just be a certain way,
Or we have interpreted it
or
that
we have
way.
interpreted
So
it.
we've
Yeah,
often created our own fetters, you know?
yeah,
Whereas when you have someone like this amazing, to give you an example, a 12th century Kannada prostitute poet, Sule Sankava, when you have someone like her saying, the men around me, they are unsurprising. My relationships with them are transactional. But my relationship with God, she says, is different because she defines her God as the shameless one, Nirlajeshwara, the one beyond shame. I can share anything with this God. There's no notion of guilt there. What an amazing concept that is.
Hearing this, I feel everyone really needs to have such a God.
Yes.
If they don't, they need to really have such a God and such a connection, because where else can you be yourself like this?
And even for those who don't want to subscribe to the notion of a God,
Yeah.
I would say this kind of idea can be a great tool to journey into yourself without guilt.
Yes.
A great tool.
Yes. Absolutely. That's so powerful. And I think that one should really reflect on this, because it's not something which would perhaps make sense right away. But a little reflection will really reveal how powerful this is, because it'll just cut all the dependency we have on so many things, dogmas, whatever people say. It'll just allow the freedom to be yourself. And I think if with a God, if you can allow yourself to be that free, it will just allow you to bring about that freedom with anyone, which is rather just being
I always
yourself.
say that Bhakti poetry, in order to enjoy it as a reader, you do not have to be a believer.
Mm.
You read it for the power of the utterance, and you read it for the transformative power of the utterance. It's capable of creating seismic shifts along your own internal fault lines. You don't need to be a believer of any kind for it. To read it, to be affected by it.
Yeah, yeah. Arundhati, how do you deal with fear and with negative messages that come your way? We all, tend um, to find it hard to go in the face of negativity. Does that bring in self-doubt? Does that, how have you learned to quieten the outside voices? And
It's
do
a
they
great
still reach
question.
you?
I sometimes think that the greatest negative voices have been inside me.
Yeah.
I've dealt with
That's
so
so
much of that,
true.
isn't it?
Isn't there more of that?
There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I think that was really the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And, we have, as you know, we have that wonderful metaphor, that wonderful image of Shiva, holding all the toxicity of the world in his throat. And that image is such a powerful one. But how does one aspire? I mean, you can only aspire to it, but how does one get there? So that was something I've actually, I've wrestled with it for many years. And especially as an artist, as you know, you want to retain the ability to be sensitive to the outside world and to yourself. You want to be vulnerable, but you don't want on the other hand, to be internalizing the negativity, right? So this is a perennial challenge, I think. I think personally, though, what has helped me is having a daily spiritual practice that is a non-verbal spiritual practice. I say non-verbal because my work is with words. So it's very important for me to have a practice that has nothing to do with words.
Meditation?
Much more breath-based.
Breath-based.
Kriya Yoga based. And that to me has been invaluable because it is a way of, it's a kind of daily inner cleansing. And it's also a way of tuning into yourself. So you tune into the deeper parts of yourself. And whenever you've touched some place inside you that I call groundwater, if you're in touch with that groundwater, you're okay. Otherwise, you can be so choked
completely
by by all the other toxins that you might have imbibed during the day.
So when, negativity comes, do you just outright dismiss it? Or do you have to go through your own processing of
I
that?
think it's about daily processing. There's no, you can intellectually try to dismiss something, but unless you actually do some inner work and find out where it's actually hurt you and what is the best way to remove it, it's a daily process.
It's a daily thing. Yeah.
You have to work at it every day.
And how about fears? Because, we just hold so many fears within us. So the very fact that, you've advanced so much means that in a certain way, you have either made peace with a lot of your fear, or you just move or forge forward despite the fear.
Well, I think there are still fears. I don't think I've cast aside all fears, but I do know that at certain times in my life, it has made sense to take the plunge.
Irrespective.
when I talked about the summons earlier, when something seems invitational, it seems on a deep level, it seems very, very compelling, and you have to follow it, you have to do it. To give you an example, I know that when the spiritual journey took on a certain momentum in my life, there came a time when I knew I needed to take a break from the life I was living. There was nothing wrong with the life I was living. I was reasonably successful, reasonably efficient, but I needed a break. I needed to recharge, recalibrate. That meant going away, as I did for some time, to a yoga center. I gave up my job, I gave up everything I was doing in 2010 and moved. I'm sure there were people who thought it was a crazy move. I'm sure there were people who dismissed it as a midlife crisis. There were those who thought that I had probably become fallen prey to, some charismatic guru. There are so many uncharitable explanations that we probably um, had for it. I knew for myself that it was necessary. I remember someone telling me at the time, and this was someone, a very senior artist. She told me, be careful before you leave the city because it's very easy to be forgotten.
Yeah, exactly.
That preyed on, it actually touched a nerve, it touched on a deep fear.
Yes. And I think that's what holds many people back from actually daring to do that.
I heard her, it touched a chord, and then I remember thinking, if that's all it takes to be forgotten, maybe it's okay to be forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's something much more important going on here.
Yeah.
And if I don't heed those summons, I might lose something far more vital, So I'm very glad I took that plunge, because what happened as a result is that I was no longer writing. A lot of the writing that happened later in my life was no longer for just a small circle of people whom I thought I knew, and felt I ought to be teasing. It was
Your
not the same
audience,
set of reference points. The reference points were suddenly in flux. I had to only write from a deeper part of who I was, and I had to address a reader who really perhaps did not exist. I didn't know if this reader existed. She was just, I had to think of my reader as me, an ideal reader who exists somewhere, who's willing to listen, who's willing to pay attention in some kind of non-judgmental way, is able to give you just the capacity for a fine-tuned, attentive listening. That's all. So I was really learning to write for a readership that I didn't even know existed. It was worth it.
Did you have to shed a lot of your actual self as you went in?
Yes.
And did this happen with effort, or did you find it just falling away, the old self?
That's a beautiful question. I think some of it fell away with such rapidity that it amazed me and sometimes even frightened me. And some of it was much more tenacious. It was difficult to peel off. But this process was turbulent and crazy, and it often left me feeling I'd lost my moorings. But there was also a deep sense of authorship. This could not have happened if I didn't, on some level, want it to.
I think this came from your interaction with Satguru. How did the whole Satguru thing begin for you? I mean, did you author his autobiography after you got into the ashram phase? It'll be interesting to learn how your whole association with Satguru developed and how that impacted your life. One of the aspects is at the end of this, did it bring you to mysticism, to skepticism, or how did all of this evolve, this journey?
I'd say the journey happened well before Sadhguru came into my life, as in the spiritual quest was very much on.
So you were always a seeker.
I was an unconscious seeker, and after 97, a conscious seeker. There was a kind of turning point in my life in the year 1997, an utterly unexplained event, an internal event, which I call a near-death experience for want of a better phrase. But it was a time when I felt completely deserted by language. I was speaking. It's not like I was incapable of speech.
How do you, if you can describe what you mean, deserted by language?
I think as someone who hangs around words, you usually have words to describe what you're going through. This felt like a state of such silence, such wordlessness, that it terrified me. I was terrified. And I was returning from a holiday. I was not unwell, so I was not physically sick, nor was I psychologically in the doldrums. I know what
Yeah.
it's like to
So
feel
it
blue.
just kind of came out of nowhere.
It was a very strong, it was a deep experience, and it felt very true. And it felt truer than anything I'd known. And it felt very silent. And most of all, it felt very empty. Empty. Very, very empty. Every day I'd go to bed, every night I'd go to bed, hoping the next day would be different. But it wasn't. And this journey lasted for about a week or a little more.
Was this a kind of depression or
No, in my experience, it was not.
it was not?
It was not. I've known what it's like to feel
Yeah.
depressed or
Yeah.
to feel,
Because somehow this description sits a little more to the listener, as if it is this depression.
Yes,
If
I
one says
understand it
every morning
totally.
that I get up, I don't feel sort of
I felt very
very
alive.
empty. Oh, but you felt alive.
Felt very alive. And I think one of the hallmarks of the depressive
So I think
experience.
when you mean empty, do you mean that you didn't feel you were carrying the burdens of our day-to-day thing? Because feeling empty in that way can actually be very, very relieving. If you do you mean empty in that way? Am I understanding it right?
If I had the words for it, I would probably have written. I told you it was a state of wordlessness. But I'd say this, that depression, or the ways in which I've experienced depression or what I know of it, involves a kind of lifelessness, a kind of deadening,
Yeah.
This was great aliveness and great emptiness all at once. And a feeling of the physical body almost turning shadowy,
Mm.
but great aliveness.
But aliveness.
It was so different from anything that I'd experienced that even if it was what you call a state of freedom, it was a kind of freedom because the body was not an
Yeah,
impediment.
if your body was not
And the mind was
paralyzed
not an
or yeah.
impediment. There was no chattering mind in this. Other than all I experienced was great fear because everything that I thought of as me, all that I thought of as me in a familiar sense, the body, the mind, the identity that mattered as Arundhati, my cats whom I loved dearly, even they seemed like shadows. Everything seemed shadowy. So I came out of it in a week. It passed. But the only thing I knew at the end of that week or 10 days is that I was no longer just a poet. I was now a seeker, a conscious seeker, and sometimes a desperate seeker. Because I knew that the experience I'd had was more true than anything I'd ever had in the past. And I needed guidance because I sensed that this was an experience that I would have to make my peace with. I would have to understand because it was inevitable.
Yeah.
At some point, all that I had thought of
Yeah,
as me
yeah.
is going to drop away again.
So when you thought of, sort of, I need some kind of mentorship, somebody to guide my understanding with this, did you then just start to seek out people, or
I did.
You did?
I did. So I did, many programs, spirituality, self-help programs. That meant being willing to look a bit like a fool and say, I don't
Yeah.
know.
And I mean, I'm curious about those experiences.
Yeah.
It's like, that saying, you have to kiss many frogs to find your prince.
Yes.
I mean, is it, would you say that you went through those kind of disappointing experiences?
I think when you're a very desperate seeker, nothing is a disappointment. It's just that maybe
a
I'm not
learning.
getting enough. I just need to move on.
Uh-huh.
So it was less about, there was no time for disappointment as much as I need to really find something that addresses this. If you get a crumb from somewhere, you're grateful.
Yeah.
So I got many crumbs and I'm more than grateful for those crumbs. But when I met Sadhguru, it was 7 years later. I attended a talk by him in South
So
Mumbai.
7 years you were kind of seeking.
A very desperate seeker, a very undignified seeker. On the one hand, I was perfectly functional, but there was a parallel world in which I was, I knew I was falling apart, There was an intensity and fervor in the seeking. So when I first met Sadhguru, it was in 2004. I attended a talk by him. And the first thing that struck me was that this might be a person I could talk to because the vocabulary seems modern and seems devoid of anything scriptural. I didn't want any religiosity in this. I just wanted someone who was able to talk about inner experience in a way that wasn't which with none of the trappings
Yeah.
of other, of faith.
Yeah.
I didn't want that
Yeah.
necessarily. And that's not what I was looking for. I felt this is someone I could talk to. More than anything, he gave me a sense of someone who could do more than talk. I felt this was someone who walked the talk. So a conversation began. I did the program. For the next 2 years, I did all the programs. And I found something was working. So it's not like all my doubts dropped away and I felt, oh my God, I've met my guru.
So you walked the talk. If you were
I
seeking,
took it a step at a time.
yeah. Yeah.
I took it a step at a time.
And then did that eventually lead to your being authorized to write his autobiography?
His biography.
His biography.
His biography. Yeah, I think what had happened by then, it was about 2 years after I'd met him. I remember we were on a walk through the ashram when I said, it's about time someone wrote about this utterly extraordinary life that you seem to have led. And he said, why don't you do it? And I agreed with great, immediately, because it felt like, oh, I can't think of anything nicer than just sitting around thinking about a person who's been inspirational in my life in many ways. But of course, it turned out to be a roller coaster ride of its own.
I mean, this is to just a person on the outside. This seems like a huge opportunity and also
A responsibility.
a responsibility and also just validation, because there's faith from his side. He wouldn't just, just leave it to someone who he didn't feel a sense of trust that I think this person can do justice to who I am. I don't think it would happen. Perhaps to you it may not seem that way, but to the outsider it certainly is pretty obvious that you wouldn't be entrusted if you couldn't deliver.
Well, there were many times on that journey when I thought I wouldn't deliver. There were many
so that
crises
brings us
of
back
faith.
to the fear part, that how do you still forge forward with all the doubts? Because I guess the truth is we can never be sure until we don't go through the process and see what really comes out of it, what you could make with it. How would you just get the confidence for free? That too with this whole thing that to write a book of such a
There's so
legendary
much.
person.
There's so much that needed to be shed along the way, as far as I was concerned. But also, I think what kept me going was the fact that he never micromanaged the process.
Really?
Never.
Really? So you were at liberty to
Absolutely.
just find whatever you felt, whatever your...
We had very
your
long
thing was.
conversations, many long conversations. And of course, I worked with some of the material that was available in the archives, and I talked to many of the people around him. So all of that went into the book. But the fact that he never felt the need to micromanage it actually helped me feel more secure. And it also helped me to trust him, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it requires a certain security. You need to be very secure with yourself in order to be able to give someone else that freedom.
Yeah, completely.
Isn't it?
Yes, yes. That's incredible. So Arundhati, on this path, what other sacrifices you made? It's you never get to this place without actually giving up a lot. What all would you say you actually sacrificed in order to become the person you wanted to, you aspired to be?
I feel if it entailed amputating parts of yourself in order to get to what really counts, and if it was all so painful, I don't think any of us would do it. So I will say, and I say this in all honesty, that it did not feel like a great sacrifice, simply because every time you follow a deeper summons, that is its own reward. So other stuff falls off, sometimes with some measure of discomfort, but it doesn't feel like a great price to pay because something else smells so good. I mean this in all honesty, because when I think back on the 1990s, when I was emerging as a young poet, the glamorous thing to be doing at the time was to write a novel. If you had a facility with language, you wrote the novel. The novel in English in India had
That's
found
what would
its
make you a
place in the
star.
sun. Yeah, you were suddenly, you could be, if you were lucky, and if you were good, you could be an international celebrity. But I knew from the start that my excitement was about poetry. Poetry was dowdy and not glamorous, and the people who practiced it, there were many in the city.
Yeah.
But we were a small bunch who met, quietly and shared little fragments with each other, and it was very marginal. You were not high profile at all.
Mhm.
I think that was, some might see that as a sacrifice. You're not going to win instant fame. There's not going to be great glamour, nor is it going to be lucrative. So I knew always that poetry was the mainstay of my life, but I had to do other things to make a living. So
Yeah.
I worked as an arts critic, performing arts critic and literary critic. I worked as a curator. I tried to make my livelihood off other means, but the center of my life was always poetry. So that's one example of what I mean by it never felt like a sacrifice because there was a deeper pleasure work.
You know what I meant is a lot of people say that, that they're unable to give up. Say, if it's about just sleep, that, you need to just sleep for a long time. And then you have a Shah Rukh Khan who says, why do you need to sleep so much? Just sleep very little. Or
Mm-hmm.
then he says, why do you need to eat so much?
Mm.
Why are you so consumed by food and the next meal?
Mm.
Just don't be bothered about any of that.
Mm.
And he said, if you really have to do something worthwhile,
Mm.
you'll have to give up these things
Mm.
and voluntarily and, deliberately.
Mm.
Because everybody, I wouldn't say everybody, but most are in the clutches of addictions of some
Of
sort or
course.
the other. And it's just, each one's, it's the poison of their choice. But
Mm-hmm.
each person is caught up in their
Right. So,
addictions.
which is why I'm saying that one of the things one did have to give up, if one is drawn to easy fame or one was drawn to the idea of money alone,
Mhm.
those were things I had to drop.
Were there any behavioral things that you actually gave up
Well, I
or
think
that you
chronic
changed?
self doubt. I'm all for a certain healthy measure of self doubt. I always encourage people
Yeah.
to have some measure of it. Cockiness never works, overconfidence never works. But corrosive self doubt that eats up your innards, I've known that. That has to be dropped. And so I'd say the way ahead was for me not to listen to all the naysayers who just tell you, oh, it's not worth it, you'll never make it, or, not that anyone actively says it. But, there are many people who don't think that they would see one as a person who wants to commit herself to poetry in the 90s in India and Mumbai. Probably there were people who saw it as a loser's option, isn't it? I'm
Yes.
sure there were people who
Yes.
saw it.
Yes. Absolutely.
Likewise, much later in my life, even though I was a
It's
fairly,
only because you've made a success of it that now
it's
it seems
okay.
like, yeah, it's all good. But what if it hadn't gone that way?
And it
So,
needn't
so
have.
there was a huge risk in committing to that.
Yes. And likewise, as I said to you earlier, in 2010, when I decided I needed to go away from what was seemingly a very, very functional life, as a curator, journalist, and as a poet. When I decided to, I was already published. I already had a few books out by then. But when I decided to go away to a yoga center at that time, I'm sure there were people who saw it again as a loser's decision,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And that had to be okay. At that point, one had to stop thinking about what other people make of you. I had to focus
Hmm.
on what I wanted to be, So I
Yeah.
think it's really about tuning into that.
Yeah, I think, really, from what you're saying, it's all about your intention. That
Mm-hmm.
is the intention really honest?
Yes.
Is it really the intention? Because even if you come out with a doubt, or even if you come out not really happy on that path, or if even if it didn't work out, I feel that there would still be a new you, which
Mm-hmm.
would then actually move in the direction of the right path. So,
You're right.
yeah.
One could also argue that maybe had I not followed these and not taken the plunge at these moments, maybe I'd have been even more successful elsewhere. Who knows?
Who
We
knows?
don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
What I do know is that this gave me pleasure, which is why I don't call it a sacrifice, really, because there was always a deeper pleasure at work. There was a pleasure in hanging around poems. So I'm very glad I never became a novelist. There was a great pleasure in going off for me. Something very deep was being addressed when I went away and spent time on my own, recalibrating, reconfiguring in the yoga center in Coimbatore. It was very important for me. And I feel all the writing that happened subsequently came out of a deeper place within myself, which I could trust. So for me, it's reward enough.
So you're suggesting that this had the whole transformative effect, that the person you went in, there was a different person that walked out.
It was transformative, hugely transformative. I think any art form practiced rigorously is transformative.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And certainly the spiritual journey, in many ways, for me, has been transformative.
I'm curious that, once a person finds their bearings, finds their commitment, and also settles into a place of a sort of connection with your spiritual self. Do you think after attaining a good degree of connection with your spiritual self, you think it's possible to fall off the path?
I think it is possible.
So you can never take it for granted.
Not at all. As I said, it's a journey you make every day. Being in touch with yourself and, uh, setting up this kind of, all you have is the archaeological implements, if you will, the tools
Yeah.
to dig deep. But you have to make that, you have to do the digging. That you have to do every day.
Yeah. And so you can never really just rest that I'm transformed and now there's nothing to look here.
Not at all.
I know how to do this.
I wish it were. I think it's really about learning how to live daily.
Yeah.
If you were to ask me, and you haven't, but maybe we're leading there really, what
It's to live
what is
with
one
that
trying?
vulnerability
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
living with that vulnerability, and at the same time finding ways to live spiritedly with uncertainty, because
This
life
is,
is
yeah,
uncertain.
yeah.
Every day is uncertain.
This was actually bringing me to my next question, that how do you live with perpetual discomfort? Because whoever is really advancing somewhere has to be in that zone. You can't ever get comfortable. And that's what I think as humans, we crave that comfort. That, oh, now I've gotten this. Now I know how this is done. Now I'll just settle in this space.
Yeah.
Takes a lot to kind of move beyond that, to say that, okay, now this seems fine, but now I'll take on the next challenge. Now I'll take on the next destination, which means again you're walking an unknown path.
Yes.
And that brings about so much of discomfort.
Yes.
So how do you sort of deal with perpetual discomfort?
I'd say two things to that. One is that I perhaps had begun to believe, I realized this, to give you a very real anecdote. This happened in 2003. I was in a writing retreat, a residency in Scotland, a very quiet place at the University of Stirling. It was my first recognition in those very quiet 3 months in this secluded space by a lock, not a sound to be heard. And here I came from the great roar of Bombay into this silent zone. It was my first realization.
It's a cultural thing too.
It's cultural noise that's no longer around you, physical noise that's no longer around you.
Yeah.
It was my first realization that some part of me had begun to believe very deeply that I needed to suffer in order to create. I think there is some truth to the fact.
Yeah. I think we all sense it.
Yes. There is some truth to the fact that some measure of discontent, some itch, is what gets you to move the pen across the page. Yeah, there is that. But we can also begin to fetishize that discomfort. We can invest in it so that we begin to believe, oh my God, I haven't done my bit if I haven't suffered. So I began to realize there is another way to write. I can also write from a place of quiet. I can also write from a place that isn't beleaguered and claustrophobic. I can write from a more expansive place within myself. What a realization.
Why does this come? Because what you've said is so profound that I think most of us struggle with this. Perhaps because initially we never managed to do something worthwhile without that suffering phase. I don't think anybody can say that they just got it on a platter with no struggle. Especially initially, the struggling is a lot.
Yes.
Because they're struggling at so many levels.
Yes.
And then it becomes a habit that you think that if there isn't struggle, or rather even suffering, not just struggle, but there's suffering involved.
Yes.
And we think that without suffering, there will not be any result.
Yes.
And I don't even know whether we unconsciously create suffering.
That's right.
We sort of create conditions in which suffering happens as if that's going to allow that. And I don't know, perhaps I feel I've been guilty of this often. And as you mention this and bring this up, I think perhaps a lot of us do that because we feel somehow as if that's going to give us the power to be able to see this through.
That's right.
So how do you, without the suffering, still gain the power, the concentration, the focus? Because suffering somehow enables that more
So I think it's
effectively.
important to look at what is it about that condition of struggle that you spoke of? What is it about that that seems to fuel the creativity? I'd say what we're really looking at those moments is that it's a moment of intensity,
Yeah.
great intensity.
Mm.
But there is a way to arrive at intensity without turning that into suffering. There is a way to do that. And when I began to discover that, I realized I did not have to be in a state of torment. I did not have to be the anguished artist in order to produce
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That there was a way to be intense, very, very alert, attentive, alive, and to allow poems to happen in that condition as well. So I think the problem is that we are socially, culturally, everywhere, I think, encouraged to believe that anguish is the only way.
And everybody sort of projects that as if suffering or it's just hard work or all those kind of things. Whereas actually, I mean, hard work is an inevitable part of
Mhm.
it. So I feel it's nothing even to say or to mention because, like when you sit to practice, you don't put a clock. That'll never get you to any
No,
result. It's about just letting yourself flow into that thing and
isn't it?
losing the sense of time. So
Absolutely.
what are your thoughts actually on that idea of functioning or coming from a place? How important would you say it's that sense of losing time?
That's very important. I
Yeah.
think what drew me to the performing arts, I started by speaking of dance. What drew me to the performing arts and theater too is the fact that when I actually am present at a concert, I'm not even aware of the passage of time.
Yeah.
And we have an experience of it, but it's a heightened experience,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
And that's exactly what happens for me when I'm working, when I'm writing. You have no experience of clock time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
clock time can be useful, but it can also be tyrannical. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But this, when you're immersed in the process, you lose that sense of clock time. And I think that is the reward of
That's
it.
the magic,
That's the
actually.
magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, when people say hard work, I don't know if it's hard. I just know that it's immersive work.
Yes. Yes.
You're lost
Yeah.
in a wonderful way.
And it's a contrast that without doing the hard work initially, you don't even come to that
No,
place of
that's
flow.
absolutely true.
So I think that's
Both
all
go together.
it both go together.
That's why I talked about the unconscious phase and the self-conscious phase before you come to the conscious phase. That's the
Yes.
way I look at it.
Yeah.
Or you could say that there's this time of great spontaneity when you create because there's joy and magic and everything.
Yeah.
Then you come to the time of craft where you realize there's a great deal of work involved.
Yes.
You learn your craft.
Yeah.
And then you come to the third stage, which is about aligning the two.
And what would you say is the role of mentorship in this? In regards to your writing, I know that for your spiritual side, you have your mentor in place, but how about the writing, the craft? Did you have
Very
mentorship?
important. I did.
You did.
So I consider Nissim Ezekiel, who was one of the major Indian poets in English, uh, you know, uh, one of the major modern poets of this country. He was a mentor. And I also had a whole writers group. We called ourselves the Poetry Circle. We met a great deal in the 80s and 90s. And that kind of group of young writers who share their work, offer rigorous feedback, that became a satsang of a kind. So satsang is not just the
Not
idea
just
of
from a
not a
spiritual
spiritual
point.
context.
Yeah.
You need a creative
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
So it offered me that. Later, much later in my life, today, I would say the very Bhakti poets we spoke of earlier, I consider them to be my satsang.
But
They
that's
are
a
for
little
me.
in isolation.
No, they're
That's
the
more
dead
in
poets.
the mind.
The
Oh,
Dead
yeah.
Poets
The dead.
Society is a very alive society. Every writer will tell you that.
Yeah.
You often have very exciting conversations with dead writers. So I would say that you come to a time when you also realize your mentors can be dead. That's okay. They're very alive, very present.
So learning a craft, how is that learned, imbibed, internalized, and actually projected? What's the process? What has been the journey of your learning your craft?
I think we touched on this earlier, but it is really about first recognizing that art involves craft. Art is not just originality, spontaneity, magic. It is that, but it's also manual labor. So you've got to learn what it takes, what it takes to to understand, you have to understand the resources at your command and how to use them. That is a journey, that's a craft journey. So you are, in that sense, an artisan,
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
in a workshop. So I think I began to realize that language is a substance, it has its own chemistry. If you apply great heat and pressure on language, its chemical properties change. If you take language out of one context into another, it can turn performative. There are all kinds of discoveries I made about language, its density, its weight, all of this. This I only learnt because I began to see myself as a lab technician in a workshop. That's how I saw myself, really. So, my many years, when I speak of a writers' group that I was part of, or my early years as a poet, it was really about learning the craft, understanding my craft. I think that was a vital part of my learning.
In terms of music or perhaps or dance for sure, there are they're very straightforward levels you have to
Mm-hmm.
go to learn. That,
Mm-hmm.
first you'd start with just the notes, just basic understanding. And so, you get guided slowly to the raga, the tala, and all of those aspects. So in writing, how do you break this up? So
Yes.
that if somebody who's actually wanting to write, if
Mm-hmm.
there's some kind of structure you could provide that or navigate that, how do you go from step A to B to C?
So, in the case of our classical arts, there's a very defined pedagogy at work now, right? It's all codified, how it is to be
Hmm.
imbibed, which steps you learn first, how you progress. It's not quite the same with writing, though, of course, now almost every second university has a creative writing program.
Yes, yes.
So, there is an attempt to invite practitioners to make the process
Yeah,
accessible
to
to
share
younger.
their particular processes.
So, I'd say there is definitely a time when you start learning technique. There are techniques.
Mm.
And it's important to roll up your sleeves and be willing to learn techniques. But there then comes a time when you learn how to internalize techniques so that it's no longer something that sticks out. It's no longer um, an acquisition, it becomes an internalization, what you were saying earlier. It
Yes,
becomes
yes.
part of who you are. Then, of course, you break the rules when you want consciously. You bend the rules, you stretch the rules, you do all kinds of things, but that's because you know
I
something
think that's
else.
because you've found your voice by then.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody who hasn't found their voice doesn't even know
For
what it
that very
means that,
person,
to find your voice.
finding your voice, and this is why I talked earlier about imitation. How do you find your voice? You first often imitate others. It's not a bad thing to do.
Yeah,
Imitate
yeah.
others
I
for
mean,
a while.
that's why we talk of those master copies, be it in music, be it in the art, in everything.
It's a
We
period of
imitate.
apprenticeship.
Yes,
Yeah, you're
yes,
an apprentice
mm,
without knowing it
yes,
sometimes, but
yes.
you're an apprentice who mimics others for a while. Then you realize that doesn't sound like you. You sometimes go through spells of what I called laryngitis. You don't have a voice at all. That's terrible, but you go through that too. You go through times when you sound like other people. You go through times when other people, this is what I call the period, I called it earlier the period of seance when other voices speak through you. But there's also the period of ventriloquism when you feel someone else has your voice and oh my God, she wrote a poem that I ought to have written. How did she get there first? You know? So
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
great sense of indignation almost that, my God, she got there before me.
Actually, Elizabeth Gilbert said something very interesting to what you're saying,
Uh-huh.
um, in a very different way. The author of Eat, Pray,
Yes, of
Love.
course.
Yeah. So she said that she believes that in the universe, she calls it God, the force, the energy. She said that God just drops ideas or themes, if you'd prefer to call them that. And she said that imagine that you're taking a walk and these themes are being dropped. And she said the one who runs first to that place and grabs the idea, because she said it's not enough to see the idea. When you grab the idea, it means you're willing to come back with it, work with it, completely manifest that idea, put it out into the world.
Hmm.
And she
I'd
said
like to,
people
though.
don't do that. They see the idea, but they will not engage with it. And they wouldn't really do that. And she said that some ideas that she has left, she said she found others and she wondered, how was this person thinking exactly like me? And so she believes that that idea, she wasn't, whatever, call it wisdom or incapacity, she wasn't able to take it. But she found that that very same idea did get manifested. So it's
I think,
interesting
no,
you
I'm not
mentioned
really
that.
talking. It's a lovely image, but it's also a beautiful image that's in a poem by Ruth Stone, the American poet.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not talking about an idea. I'm
Okay.
talking about voice. I'm saying when someone else speaks in a voice that you believe is yours, it's almost a sense of outrage. There is a phase of conscious apprenticeship when you mimic others. There is then a phase often of laryngitis when you don't have a voice. And then there is a phase when you sometimes think someone else is speaking my lines the way I ought to have spoken them. There's a moment of envy, is what I'm saying. There's no right and wrong about this. It's just an unreasonable moment of envy. But then comes a time when you actually discover something that I think of as the timbre of your voice. It's no longer another idea being dropped somewhere. It's just yours. And where you are is absolutely the right place to receive it. Absolutely. You couldn't have been anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that comes only after a
Through these
long
phases. Yeah.
process of
Yeah.
agonizing
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
technical
Yeah.
questions. It's good to have those
Yeah.
technical
Yeah.
questions. I love your Elizabeth Gilbert analogy. It's just that I think we were racing ahead to discuss ideas. I'm not.
No, I misunderstood.
Huh.
I thought that I didn't realize that you were meaning, how the best way to compliment someone is through imitation. So now the tables had turned that in the beginning, if you were imitating someone, now
Yes.
the time has come where somebody is imitating
No,
you.
they're not even imitating you. It's just an unreasonable feeling that you have.
Oh, it's just your
That's it's
perceptions.
your
It's got
perception.
nothing to do with
Nothing to
what they
do with
did.
that. And we're not talking ideas here. We're talking craft, form,
I
technique.
see. I see. I misunderstood.
Yeah.
I thought that you were talking of ideas.
Yeah. So we're
Okay.
talking craft now, right? You
Yeah,
are
yeah,
craft
yeah, yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Arundhati, what are your thoughts on aging, the aging process? For women, this is a huge concern
Mm.
because the older self that you knew, that you took for granted,
Yeah.
suddenly there's a new connection
Yeah.
we have to make with our new reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you say you've how do you deal with this, or what are your perspectives that have changed?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think it preoccupies me and it preoccupies so many of us.
All of us.
And I feel that a lot of my work, a lot of my poetry and the poems I'm drawn to are poems that reflect this. So, in my most recent book of poems, I have a whole cycle of poems about a woman called Avvaiyar who voluntarily chooses old age over youth. This is a great figure of Tamil literature. She's considered to be one of the great Tamil poets and travelers and grandmother poets that we've inherited. And I started thinking, and that gave rise to a whole cycle of poems. Why would one voluntarily choose old age? And that came from my own questions, really. What does it mean? I think one part of it is hard. It's different. You look different.
Yeah, I think that's the main
Yeah,
thing.
that's definitely.
Otherwise, anyone would want to be because of the wisdom that
I know.
comes with age.
Well, yeah. Sometimes on good days, there is wisdom.
I mean, there
But
generally
yes,
is.
there
You
is
can
generally.
never take it for granted, but
I think I've certainly felt that each decade has grown better than the previous one. But there also comes the fact that the body has different surprises to spring on you,
completely,
isn't it?
completely.
So I'm curious about whether it's possible to retain an element of, can we stay curious about the body? The body is full of surprises. It has sprung many surprises on us in the
Yeah.
past.
Mhm.
We've grown rapidly. We've become adults. We've become sexual beings. We've moved beyond that sometimes. Where are we? Where is this body leading us?
Yeah.
So I think if we are able to retain an element of curiosity, I think that's important. And there's a wonderful poem that I often go back to and I include it in my new book, Wild Women. It's a poem by the Buddhist nun Amrapali. She's a courtesan, as many of us know. She lived in the time of the Buddha, a beautiful woman, a courtesan whom everyone desired, who in her later years becomes a nun in the Buddhist Sangha. And there is a poem that we have even today by her, which is an utterly marvelous poem in which you have the aging Amrapali looking down at her body. She describes every feature of her body and says, "This is how it once was, this is how it now is." There's heartbreak in that poem, but there is also, as I see it, there is also pride. Pride at what this body is capable of, an ability to see the body as a tremendous instrument, an instrument that's capable of housing the sacred, and pride at the fact that there is a certain moment when this body is in all its glory that can never be taken away. So I see Amrapali's journey as a ripening,
Yeah.
and as I read that poem, it became clear to me that that process of aging is full of its own heartbreaks at the perishability and the frailty of the body. But there's also wonder at what this body is capable of.
Although I feel, just as you were speaking now, that I think this is more of a possibility for those who from their youth have gone beyond the body. Because those who've been stuck only in the beauty of the
Mhm.
body and just nurturing that
Mm.
aspect,
Mhm.
when that starts to go away,
Mm.
perhaps they're left with nothing
Many
else.
are.
So many
And
are.
we are often, unfortunately, encouraged into believing by the
Yeah,
cultural
yeah,
climate
yeah.
that this is all that counts.
And that this is good enough, or
Youth
this
and
is the only.
beauty
Yeah,
are adequate.
yeah.
When in fact, there is something about that process of ripening, as we all know, when you relax into yourself, when beauty is no longer just about sort of packaging yourself, it's about the great joy of unpackaging
Yeah.
and relaxing and being gloriously who you are.
Yeah. When you say this, I was just remembering there was a dear friend of mine who once pointed out to me, those famous words from the song, Do Lafzon Ki Hai Dil Ki Kahani.
Huh.
So, that the entire song of life is just two words.
Yes.
Ya hai mohabbat, ya hai jawani.
Ah.
So people tend to think, but I feel it's interesting that you are kind of touching on that third unspoken dimension, which is, yes, perhaps love could be that also. But I think it's the evolving, the maturing
I
that
think there are
you're.
too often, unfortunately, we've been given just two alternatives.
Yeah.
The alternative one is that the body is everything, and youth and beauty and the possibilities of an agile,
Mhm.
fit body, tremendous, but that is everything.
Yeah.
And then we have the other alternative, which is that the body is perishable and therefore we should transcend it. It's of no use, it's filth, which some of our mystic poets also say. But the finest sacred poetry tells us that the body is neither filthy nor is it to be fetishized, that the body is in fact the shrine in
Temple.
which the divine chooses to exist. So it's a great possibility, if you really are in touch with its deepest capabilities.
And I also think that the thing you said before, like if we say the body is a temple, then what is the light of that temple? And I think you said this with the breath.
Mhm.
That's the powerhouse, the energizer,
Breath
because you
is
work
still a
on that.
bridge. The breath is still a way to get to that light that you call it, or the sacred, or whatever you might call it, the
Yeah.
deepest mysteries of the body.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I mean, I'm trying to get to an understanding that if we want to actually consider this body a temple,
Mhm.
the components that would help us to be able to establish a connection, a ritual, a practice with which you can actually start to experience the body as a temple and not just as something which is to be exhibited or
Yes.
presented, but to engage with it in a sense of it being a temple, of it being a place which is sacred and has
First,
your
to
power.
treat the body like it is sacred, firstly, not with, you don't disparage it. At the same time, you don't say that this is everything. How do you wear the body is really the question.
Mhm.
And I think I practice one set of disciplines, but there are so many available today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the yogic system is a tremendous one with so many
Mhm.
parts.
Yeah.
If we were to find a way to deepen our experience of the physical, see where it leads you.
Yeah.
See where it leads you.
Yeah.
It leads you beyond just the appetites of that we are familiar with. It leads you somewhere deeper. See where that is.
Mm.
It just struck me that what Amrapali reminds us of, and equally the Tamil poet that I mentioned, Avayar,
Mhm.
who chooses to become a grandmother well before her time. I think what they remind us of is that aging is a kind of saging,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it brings. That
Yeah.
is its reward. There is a deep understanding that distilled wisdom can bring you, experience brings you. It doesn't always bring you.
What are some amazing discoveries that reveal themselves to you through your perseverance, through your work?
That language is a chemical, as I said earlier. It is a chemical. It has all kinds of chemical properties. It can grow more acidic or more alkaline, and you've got to know how to alter its pH value. That's part of really learning about your craft as a poet. Language is chemical. That silence or the pause can be alchemical, that it is capable of transforming something. So you've got to know how to pattern your word and your silence. There is a reason, Chandana, why poetry is the oldest form of literary enchantment on the planet. And that's because it is the only verbal form that consciously embraces pauses. There's a reason why a page of poetry has so many blank spaces. It's not just about word or how you choose words. It's about how you choose word and pause. That's rhythm, word and pause. Both are vital. So I think it's about learning that there is a chemistry
Completely.
involved, there's an alchemy involved. And the other discovery I'd say is realizing that you don't have to raise your voice to be heard, that it is possible to drop your voice, keeping the faith that a murmur can sometimes be more powerful than a microphone, a megaphone. A murmur, a whisper
Yeah.
can be powerful too.
And this is cool. This just revealed itself to you as you
As we-
went through the process. Because these are things, we're told technically.
Yes.
I mean, in music, we're actually told, they call this a nyas.
Yes.
Nyas, or the significant pause.
Yes.
Because otherwise the next whatever phrase you're singing just wouldn't establish itself.
That's right.
It's the same in painting, that it's not about how much you paint, but how much empty canvas space do you leave for the eye to create a rhythm and move. But what's very interesting that in writing, you discovered this for
No, but even
yourself.
in writing, the technique will teach you this. There are ways to manipulate rhythm.
Yeah.
If I had not had my own personal first-hand encounter with silence in the way that I did in 97, I think I would have still talked of it as a kind of technique. It ceased to be technique for me at that point. It became much more about realizing that silence is the very space from which all the sound emerges. That's where it's all coming from. It's not just about neatly patterning sound and silence. It's about understanding that this is the octane that fuels a poem.
Yes.
Otherwise, there would be no poem at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The internet has changed the way we think. We can almost say that in our lifetimes, they're like two phases, one before the internet and one after the internet. So, what are your thoughts on this, and what really changed for you when the internet arrived?
Life changed. I mean, suddenly we were no longer writing in little cubby holes. Our voices were available to everyone everywhere, and we could hear voices from everywhere too. So I think when I first found an Italian translator somewhere at the other end of the world, it felt like a moment of magic. I think the great magic of the internet is just this, that it has bridged time and space to such a degree that everyone seems equidistant today.
Yeah.
They're as near or as far as you want them to be.
Do you also feel that we've become like crazily dependent on it? Because especially the younger generations, they're just unable to do without their cell phones, or they just can't exist without having the internet in some form around them.
Yeah.
And what are really the challenges or the pitfalls of this kind of unending engagement, obsession, addiction to the internet?
I think any kind of addiction is a problem. It's a great resource, but if you're addicted to it, it's a problem. It's a problem mainly because you choose then reaction over response. So, for instance, I receive an email, I take a day to respond, I reply to you tomorrow. Today, I receive that text message and I will respond to you the very next second. So, a moment that I could have spent considering my response not just what I say, but how I say it. All of that is now tossed up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's all gone. So we are in constant states of reactivity, and I think that can be deeply damaging
I
to
so agree with that.
communication.
That really, I think that's fundamentally the problem. That we aren't really thinking, reflecting. Those very important qualities have completely been abandoned due to this age of instant. I mean, I remember my daughter saying that she was once unhappy about something,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody said something to her, and she came back, and I felt a little concerned, and I asked her that, "Oh, so are you okay? Because you must be feeling bad." And she said, "No, mom, I'm fine. I just went on my phone and I'm totally fine." And it just sort of
Mm,
indicated something to me that
yes,
people are using that to distract themselves from anything that pains them or makes them uncomfortable.
that's right.
And perhaps we are missing significant pieces of information that we actually needed to aid our growth, to reflect on that, that why did it disturb us so much? And it could have been something disturbing. And perhaps there are many such missed opportunities,
I think
which,
there are, and I'd even go so far as to say, Chandana, that sometimes we don't need additional information. We have enough information.
yes,
We have
yes,
as much information as we
too
need.
much.
Too much. Most of the time, what we need is a reprieve from information. There is a reason why I'm told that even the comma today is not used by people when they send text messages to each other.
True.
It's almost as if the comma and the full stop or the period have become ways of being discourteous. It's a way of being impolite to use it, even. Why have these forms of punctuation gone out of style? I would go so far as to say they've gone out of style because we no longer value them.
Yes.
There is a value to the pause, there's a value to taking a reprieve, to taking a break,
So well put.
isn't it?
Yes.
I think if I believe poetry counts today more than ever, it is because I believe it gives you a respite from too much information.
Yes. Yes.
It's
And
not just giving
don't
you
you
an
feel
experience.
that it also sparks your own imagination?
That's right.
Because you wrote it a certain way, but it'll be interpreted in so many
That's
different
the whole
ways.
point, isn't it?
Yeah.
All art
All art.
is an invitation to
Yes.
experience. It is not an invitation to information,
Yes. Yes. I
isn't
think
it?
that's the key thing.
That's it. It makes a big
Experience and
difference.
information.
Yes.
It's really all about
Yes.
that.
And if the Bhakti poets, to go back to my earlier, the loves of my life, the Bhakti poets invite us to experience. They do not invite us to academic knowledge.
I just thought of another thing, that are strong women intimidating? And do strong women actually find um, partners?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen a lot of my friends
Mm-hmm.
as strong women.
Mm.
And what do you think? What becomes a problem in for a strong a woman who actually knows herself? If she projects that, it becomes very difficult for her to
Mm-hmm.
find a partner.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, I think
and
it's
and
true.
what's really the challenge in this?
I think the fact that a strong woman can be vulnerable and strong, a person can be vulnerable and strong all at once. I think very many people are unable to see that the two can go together,
Mm,
you know, that you don't have to choose one or
yeah,
the other.
yeah.
We are both. And I think that can scare people.
Yeah,
It can scare
yeah,
people.
yeah.
There's room for doubt, but there's also room for clarity.
Also,
Both.
do you think that it's because of the stereotypes that we've just
Certainly.
understood women to be a certain way and men, even though that might not even be their actual personality type,
Mhm. I think
but
it can
they're
be just as
forced to.
oppressive for men,
Yeah, yeah,
to have to be
exactly.
strong in a particular
Yes,
way.
yes,
There are many ways to be
yeah,
strong and
yeah,
many ways to be
completely.
vulnerable all at once. So, yes, I think it's difficult for anyone on a path of who's really trying to reclaim who they are or is trying to look for who they are. I think that kind of person can be challenging partner material,
Yes,
you know.
yes.
But I think the world is changing rapidly. People
Yeah,
are also, I
perceptions
believe,
are changing very
perceptions are
fast.
changing too.
Yes,
So I think even our understanding of what we're looking for in a partner
yes,
has
yes,
changed.
yes.
For me, it's certainly
Yes.
changed.
No, and it does. I mean, actually, I also think that it depends on what stage of life you are.
Yeah.
I remember once me and my sister having this conversation that remember those guys at 18 and 20 that we thought they were so cute. She said, "Don't you think it was a huge sense of relief thank goodness that we never explored those interests. So even actually the people you find interesting at 18, 20, 25, 30, it's just, as you evolve, your interest in people keeps
That's right. It keeps
changing.
changing.
Yeah,
Sometimes one explores those interests too, and then one moves on.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
one moves on.
So, Arundhati, what would you sort of think are the different personality types that you hold? All of us have different personality types. This is an open-ended question that you could
Yes.
approach in whatever way, whatever sparks your imagination.
Well, I think I play different roles with different people. This is true. I'm a daughter, a very close, I think, engaged daughter with my mother, and I'm certainly a partner with my husband. I've been a mother to my cats, so, and I've been a friend. I see myself largely, I think most of my relationships today,
Mm.
I see as friendships of a kind, almost everything, including the one as a daughter and as a spouse. I think eventually you're a kind of friend. The, the texture of the friendship keeps shifting. That's all. So that is a vital part of who I am. The other part of who I am, I'd say much more, if I were to sort of pinpoint a fundamental identity, I think I used to see myself as a seeker. That's
Hmm.
a fundamental identity. I see myself more now as a traveler, maybe a spiritual traveler, an experiential traveler. I see myself as a listener, very deeply as a listener. I think these are the roles
It's
that I
so
play.
interesting, right? That there's so many dimensions to our personality.
Mm-hmm.
You've spoken about a lot of them. How about the dark side of our personality?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the one we avoid. Like, brush it under the carpet. Don't allow it to emerge. So how does one really navigate the dark side of our personality?
Splatter
Because
yourself on a page, as I said earlier, write it out. That's what that's my part of my journey as a writer. You write it out. You make sure you don't hide it, at least for
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, exactly.
And the one thing you'll find, and I always give this to young people in workshop exercises, sit down with a really intense emotion, whatever it is. Maybe anger. Let's take anger. Sit down in a moment of intense rage and write. You will find that by the time you reach the end of the page, something has shifted. You don't have to try to move it, it has shifted. That is the nature of an
It was
intense.
wanting to
It
to,
shifts
to
on
be
its
let
own.
out.
It happens on its own. So that's also the alchemy of writing. It shifts things around. Your inner furniture is always moving. So I'd say, that's what I'm empowered to do as a writer, to be able to explore those feelings deeply and fully. And in acknowledging them, something shifts.
What do you believe is true, even if you can't prove it?
I can't prove it, and I'm not even sure I always believe it. But on some deep level, I have a hunch that we are the authors of our lives. I think on some very deep level that we may not be aware of, we've chosen this particular life script. A great deal of freedom lies in our hands even now, but I think, you know, the reins are with us.
Absolutely. What questions have disappeared?
I don't know if questions disappear, but some of the space around the questions has increased. There's more spaciousness. Maybe the most fundamental question is, does the universe have ears? That was a big question for me. It felt like I had all these questions. I was shaking a fist to the heavens saying, where are the answers? I don't know if I found answers, but I'm, I think that the universe has ears. The universe listens.
What's the thing that you've changed your mind about?
What I said earlier, that it is necessary to suffer in order to create art. I think I've changed my mind about that. I've also changed my mind about the fact that, I used to think self realization was going to be one thunderclap
Yeah,
moment.
like a snap.
I don't think it happens that way, or at least maybe not to me. I think it's been a journey, a gradual unfolding journey of self discovery. And I'm actually grateful for that.
Mhm. How important do you think it is to craft a particular look or an image for yourself? Because, there's one thing that we hold about ourselves, our perceptions, our belief, but, we engage in society and it kind of becomes, whether unconsciously or consciously, whether we craft a particular image in how we would like to be perceived by the world. So, what are your thoughts on that?
That's interesting because I've always had mixed feelings about this question of how one should project oneself. Should one, the process of creating something is in a place of great vulnerability. So maybe one should look as vulnerable as possible. I used to dress down for readings, poetry
Yes.
readings. I
Yes.
used to make sure I wore my oldest khadi kurta
Yeah,
for
isn't
it.
it strange that we tend to do
Yeah,
that
I did that.
because we want to fit in
Yeah.
a particular
Well, I
way?
don't know if it was just fitting in. I felt, the poems have come out of a place where I was definitely not creating them when I looked glamorous. Let me invite you to a place where I'm not going
Okay.
to be terribly
Mhm.
glamorous. That's fine. I did that and I'm happy to have done that. But I remember someone telling me at one point that you're also inviting people to a place that you love when you're sharing your poems. So what would you like to, how would you like to appear? Well, then I said, the garment that I enjoy hugely is the sari. And I love the sari because apart from the fact that Indian textiles are just magnificent and varied and
Absolutely.
versatile,
Absolutely.
I love the sari because it really fits any mood, any season. And I love the way that you drape it the way you drape it. It takes on
Yes.
a uniqueness
Yes. Yes.
in the way you choose to wear it. It doesn't standardize you. I think each woman in a sari is quite different,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
So I enjoy saris. I think,
And it's interesting that, from this, it sounds as if that introspection is never limited. It
mm-hmm.
spreads to everything. So
Uh-huh.
even the image that we, perhaps even not really subconsciously, it's somewhere at the back of our mind.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes a defined look,
Mm.
which actually serves the purpose of whatever work you wish to achieve in the world.
I think it's a way of, if I consider
Yeah.
sharing my work as a kind of celebration,
Yeah.
I'd like to be
You'd like to
celebratory.
be the person that
Yeah.
would
I'd like to
be that. Yeah.
celebrate it.
Ethics and values, our principles, are a very, very significant part of who we are. How have you sort of distilled and processed your ethics, your values, your moral standings on things as you've approached and gone through life?
I don't see morals in any kind of absolute way. So my understanding of ethics or integrity is just that you try to align what you say with what you do and to what you think you are. What you think you are keeps changing,
Yeah.
over time. So my understanding of morality has also changes. So I don't hold it in any fixed way. Much as when people ask me, "Are you confident? Does that mean you're a feminist?" I have no problem with the word feminist. I consider myself a feminist. But for me, feminism is not a state of having arrived. It's not an identity that I get up and wear every day. It's really about questioning and exploring the many ways in which gender is constructed. That's an ongoing journey. I'm still on that journey. I have no problem with the word. I'm not squeamish about it. But I'm a journey. I'm not a destination.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise with this idea of morality.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's unfolding.
This brings me to another thing, that you are a strong feminist, and that comes across in your writings, in your views. Have you always had this strong feminist streak, or did it begin with standing up for yourself? Because it seems to speak to women at large.
Standing up for yourself, but as I said, and of course being very aware of the fact that we live in very unequal worlds where some voices are heard more than others. It bothers me when some voices are heard more than others, whatever the context. You want to hear other voices. So to me, that's been an important part of my life. There are times I have felt very unheard. So in order to feel heard, I realized one of the first things I needed to do is to truly listen to something else and then create the space, hold space for others, and then make sure that I get heard too. That's what I do for myself, right? So this is an ongoing thing. So I don't see feminism as, oh, I'm a strong feminist. Yes. But for me, strength is really about asking questions. For me, feminism has been about asking questions, which I'm still asking.
Yes.
about how our identity is created. Are they as fixed as we think they are? What does it mean to be a woman? Does that change? And of course, it has changed.
Yeah, I think this is what
Ongoing.
most aren't willing to do. It's too daunting to kind of question something that
Mhm.
your mother has accepted, your
Yes.
grandmother has accepted, your friends have accepted.
Mm.
And now you're starting to question that.
Mhm.
However right it might be, because I
Mhm.
feel fundamentally
Yes.
everybody knows,
That's right.
but you won't find a lot of support. If
Yeah.
you bring it up, even from your childhood, nobody's going to encourage those questions,
It's true.
which means you're really going to have to feel strongly enough about it
Yes.
to keep voicing it, irrespective of nobody agreeing
Mhm.
with
They
you.
are you. It means asking some inconvenient
Yeah.
questions, of others,
Yeah.
but it also means asking some inconvenient
Yes.
questions of
Of
yourself.
yourself.
So it doesn't make life very easy,
Mhm.
but it makes life interesting.
Yes. And also, I think that gives hope, because
Mhm.
the minute you ask that question, it means that life could be another way. It needn't be so painful. You
Mm.
needn't feel so deprived, subjugated. It's
The reason I put together my most recent book, Wild Women, is because I wanted to collect all the women mystic poets of this country, as many as I could accommodate in one book, who remind us that there are many, many women before us who have asked these questions. They may not be labeled feminists, but they're certainly women who've asked strong, uncomfortable questions about the worlds they lived in and about who they are. They have not been afraid to ask those questions. And to me, that is a reminder that we are not alone on this journey. There have been others before us. And I think it helps everyone a great deal to know that you're not alone.
You know what's really surprising is a lot of these saint poets that you've been talking, or these women. Why have we lost so much of these pieces in
We've
time?
lost them, I think, simply because they were inconvenient. And we've defanged them into these plaster saints. So they become anemic, bloodless people you can paste on your wall or turn into calendar art. We've turned them into women without hungers, without hormones, as if they're just meant to be, they were born as saints, without bodies. But they had bodies, they had minds, they used them both, but they also had a great thirst for something more. And they articulated all three: the body, the mind, and more.
You know, I feel it's so sad that for men, we allow men to have all these dimensions. And then for women, we just have a certain category. And that becomes very hard, the stereotypes and the set expectations. And
I'd say, in its own way, you're right about that.
I mean, strangely, we have Draupadi, we have Sita, and and strangely, one fits into the stereotype, the sacrificing, the
I
obedient.
And in the case of the women mystic poets, most of us settle for Mirabai,
Yeah.
and the demure, saintly looking Mirabai, the way we remember her from the comic books of our youth, the
Hmm.
Amar Chitrakatha. And I thought that's how she was. But this is a woman who asks crazy questions, passionate questions. Why don't we hear the danger in their voices?
Yeah, yeah.
You
It's
know?
always, they're like so demure, or just the aspect is of her devotion to Lord Krishna.
Well,
But
I think there
nobody
is a
is,
devotion, but it's a fiery devotion.
yes, it's such a huge passion. And I mean, this is a complete, like, I don't care about the world. Who dares to do that?
That's right.
And the problem was, what isn't spoken about is too much about all the things. She's glorified in a
Mm-hmm.
certain way, but
Mm-hmm.
we are not trying to see the humane part
That's
of the
right.
struggle with to become a Mirabai, all
Mm-hmm.
the sacrifices, all the problems.
That's right.
We've just idolized the part that, oh, she was just her devotion to Krishna,
Yes.
and that becomes the problem.
I think that's the biggest
Yeah,
stumbling block.
yeah, yeah,
So to me, putting these voices together was about reclaiming that,
yeah.
reclaiming their humanness
And
above
it
all.
would be very interesting if you could share a couple of those points,
Mm.
because they show a very beautiful, very human interaction with God in
Mm.
ways that we wouldn't normally think that one
Yes.
would engage with God, with the divine in this kind of a various ways.
So Janabai, for instance, is a wonderful example. She's a 13th century mystic, a woman mystic poet, a maid servant. When she's tired, she asks her god, Vithala, she asks Vithala to come and do the dishes. When she's even more tired, she asks Vithala to give her a bath. All this is absolutely acceptable in her relationship with her God because it is one of absolute intimacy, you know. So she has a poem in which she says, in Arun Kolatkar's translation, she says, I eat God, I drink God, I sleep on God, I buy God, I count God, I deal with God. God is here, God is there, void is not devoid of God. God is within, God is without. And furthermore, there's God to spare. There's that kind of
All inclusive.
that
Yeah,
breezily
yeah.
includes everything, you know? So, or you have Rupa Bhavani, who is a 17th century Kashmiri woman mystic, who says, on the path of Shiva, become Shiva himself. This is not just about worshipping
Yeah,
the
yeah.
divine up there. This is about embodying the
And
sacred.
that's so hard because, you know, we just want the ready made. We
Mhm.
just want that I pray to you and you give me what I want. But I'm not willing to go through the process of becoming. That
That's right.
metamorphosis is too painful.
Also, we
So,
are encouraged to live with those hierarchies. These are women who are saying we are no longer
yeah,
going to settle for hierarchies.
yeah,
And I think some of the greatest mystic poets, male and female, have said that.
yeah, yeah. So, Arundhati, can we have you do some reading
Sure.
for us?
So, Chandana, because we were talking about aging, I thought the poem I'd like to read to you today is a poem about aging joyously. It's a poem called Song for Catabolic Women. It's a fun poem. Catabolic, I use playfully just to suggest, when you're coming apart, when the metabolic process breaks down, there's a way to celebrate it. It's just fun. It's a fun poem for you today. It's an anthem for women everywhere. Song for Catabolic Women. We're bound for the ocean and the largesse of sky. We're not looking for the truth or living a lie. We're coming apart. We're going downhill. The fury is almost done. We've had our fill. We are passionate, ironic, angelic, demonic, clairvoyant, rational, wildly Indian, anti-national. We're not trying to make our peace. We're not itching for a fight. We don't need your shade and we don't need your light. We know charisma isn't contagious and most rules are egregious. We're catabolic women. We've known the refuge of human arms, the comfort of bathroom floors. We've stormed out of rooms. We've thrown open the doors. We figured the tricks to turn rage into celebration. We know why the oldest god dances at every cremation. We've kissed in the rose garden. We've been the bells of the ball. We've hidden under bed covers. And we've stood tall. We are not interested in camouflage or self revelation, not looking for a bargain or an invitation. We are capable of stillness even as we gallivant, capable of wisdom even as we rant. Look into our eyes. You'll see we're almost through. We can be kind, but we are not really thinking of you. We don't remember names and we don't do Sudoku. We are losing EQ and IQ, forgetting to say please and thank you. We're catabolic women. We've never ticked the right boxes, never filled out the form. Our dharma is tepid, our politics lukewarm. We've had enough of earnestness and indignation, but still keep the faith in conversation. We are wily Easterners enough to argue nirvana and bhakti, talk yin and yang, Shiva and Shakti. When we are denied a visa, we fall back on astral travel. When samsara gets intense, we simply unravel. We are unbuilding now, unperpetuating, unfortifying, disintegrating. We are caterwauling, catastrophic, shambolic, cataclysmic, catabolic women.
Amazing. How beautiful is
That's a
this?
fun
How
poem for
beautiful
you.
is this? Absolutely beautiful. So, one more thing before we leave. Do you have a quote, a mantra, something that is meaningful to you, something that you
Sorry.
abide with? It could just be anything. It could be a mantra you say, or something which has some kind of meaning to your life.
There have been many what I call my own sutras that have mattered to me. I'll quote you three. One is from my own poem, which is my own little guiding light in my world, which is to be unhurried, forever out of step, always on time. That's one that I hang on to. The other is one from Sadhguru, which has helped me a great deal.
Arundhati, thank you so much for such an insightful and inspirational take on creativity, because creativity is life itself. As a parting thought, could you share with us some mantra or some sort of, it could be a quote, something that you sort of live by, belief?
I don't know if I believe, if there's anything I particularly believe, but there are certain sutras, I'd say little threads I use, to guide my way through the day. One of the threads is from my own poem, which is a line that I remind myself of. Sometimes you really need to slow down in order to catch up with the rest of the world, but we begin to believe that we need to race. So the line that I hang on to is to be unhurried, forever out of step, always on time. I think the two go together. You can be out of step,
Yes.
unhurried, and always on time. For me, that's important. So that's one. The other is a line from Sadhguru himself, who says, there's a line in which he says, don't look down at anything, don't look up at anything. To me, that's been a wonderful sutra because it's a way of really de-hierarchizing
Yeah.
the gaze, not living with hierarchies of any kind. The third is probably the line I quoted to you earlier from Rupa Bhavani, the 17th century Kashmiri mystic, who says, on the path of Shiva, become Shiva himself. So, whatever this path is, whatever you consider to be the ultimate, whatever it is, not to merely rest content with worshipping it, seek to become it. Become it in every fiber of your
Embody and live
being.
it. Yeah. Beautiful. Again, completely inspiring, motivating, and insightful as everything we discussed today. Thank you, Arundhati.
Thank you, Chandana.